Democratic Senator for Connecticut, Chris Murphy. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad to have you here with us.
Thanks for having me.
And I do want to ask you, first of all, I mean, because when you serve your constituents for the right reason, you're doing it for the people, and our thoughts and prayers are with the people in Connecticut right now. I know there's some deadly flooding going on. Is there anything you want to talk about in terms of recovery efforts?
Well, I've been on the phone all day with municipal leaders. We've already lost lives.
Yeah.
We are, right now the waters have not completely and totally receded, so there's still real potential for infrastructure and property damage. Hopefully we'll get this under control by the end of the day, and we're going to be ready to deliver federal aid if there's the need, which unfortunately I think there will be.
And certainly that's always the issue with floodwaters. You don't quite know the damage for several weeks, even months to come. I also want to ask you a little bit about, of course, the reason that we're here, the Democratic National Convention. There is a lot of energy in the air, but there has been energy in this party for several weeks now. I do want to ask you about what Vice President Harris said yesterday. She was asked how she would pay for her quite ambitious economic plan that was unveiled on Friday, and she said return on investment is how she would plan to pay for that. Can you elaborate for us on what that means?
Yeah, when you put money in the pockets of very poor families, that money goes right back into the economy. That money creates jobs. And so making investments in the middle of the country, in some of the families that are struggling the most, it can end up growing the overall size of the economy. I'm sure when she presents this plan to Congress, when she wins, she's going to have more details around it. But I don't think there's any doubt that there is a real potential for the overall size of the economy and then the revenue that the government collects to increase as you put money into the hands of some of the neediest families.
Are you concerned about the initial, though, adding $1 trillion to the debt?
Well, I'm concerned with rescuing families from poverty right now. We also have the expiration of the Trump tax cuts next year. Now, I don't want to raise taxes on anybody that's, making under $300,000, $400,000, but even if you let those tax cuts expire for millionaires and billionaires, you would have plenty of money left over to invest in poor families with an expansion of the child tax cut.
Let me ask you a little bit about immigration. This is an issue that in the polling, while a head-to-head matchup, she is polling ahead of Donald Trump in this moment. But in terms of some issues, right, the economy, inflation, who Americans trust more to handle it, it's Donald Trump. Also immigration. And you posted on X, you said this year we go on the offensive on immigration and border security. But my question is she's already in the White House as vice president. Why now? Why this year?
Well, for a few reasons. One, because as a vice president, she helped craft and push the toughest bipartisan border bill that Congress has been able to take a look at in decades. Democrats were for it. Donald Trump killed that bill. Second, she actually is presiding over an administration that has less crossings at the southern border on a daily basis than were happening at the end of the Trump administration. So there is a record and a contrast to run on in this election. And I would advise the vice president and her team to go hard at Donald Trump. He killed the tough bipartisan border bill. She says that if she becomes president, she'll pass it.
But border crossings did reach all-time highs under their administration, and they could have signed executive action earlier and didn't.
Well, they did move forward with a very tough rule reorganizing the asylum rules at the border. But the reality is the border was closed during the pandemic, right? So over the course of the 2 years while the border was closed, there was a buildup of individuals who were seeking to come to the United States to apply for asylum. So inevitably, whoever was president, a Republican or a Democrat, when the pandemic ended, when the border reopened again, there was, of course, going to be a surge that over the last 6 months, this president and vice president have done a credible job of turning down to the point, as I said, today there are fewer people crossing on a daily basis than were crossing during the Trump administration.
Do you think that she will address that issue during this convention this week?
I believe she will, because I think it's an issue that we can win on. There is a bipartisan border bill that would invest $20 billion in the border, give the president the power to shut down the border. Donald Trump talks tough on the border, but he opposes that bill because he doesn't want the border fixed. He can't imagine a world in which he and his Republican allies can't complain about the border. So there is a contrast in this election. Kamala Harris that wants to fix the border, Donald Trump who wants to exploit it for political purposes.
Senator Murphy, thank you so much for being here with us today. We appreciate your time as always.